Let's talk about Charles and Diana's visit back in 1983. This was their first overseas tour together. How did it go? How would you describe it?
That trip went very well for Diana, of course, because she's a 22-year-old. She brings her 10-month-old beautiful baby, and she is just a superstar. She stands out there in her dresses. She's dancing. She's meeting people. She's on the, on the radio. She is gorgeous, and her voice. We wanted to hear her voice because we'd seen pictures of her, but for the first time in Australia, we actually got to hear her to see what she sounded like. Not so good for Charles, unfortunately, because not long before in Wales, he'd made a comment to one of the Queen's friends, Queen's cousins, saying that, she now gets all the attention, or words to that effect. And that was crystallised in the trip to Australia, that there was this young, beautiful, dynamic woman who suddenly everybody wanted to shake hands with or wanted to smile at or have a chat to. And so when the moment that they'd go one direction, she'd go one, he'd go the other, he'd almost hear a sigh when the people on his side that they weren't going to get Diana. So a tricky trip, but kudos to that couple, because of course it was the first time that a baby had been brought on a royal tour. So, it paved the way for Meghan and Harry and, of course, Kate and William to bring their children on trips in the future. So she was a groundbreaker.
Was this the first chink in their marriage? Did the Australia trip tip that marriage over the edge?
Look, they'd only been married a couple of years. They hadn't had Prince Harry at that stage. Look, very early on, even from their honeymoon, we know from Diana, her true story, the book where she spoke to Andrew Morton about her experiences, that even from the honeymoon, she realised that there were areas of incompatibility, of course. I think this highlighted that when they were working together, there were going to be some issues. But she was still very much in love with him at that stage, and he her, but in the whatever love means kind of landscape. I mean, clearly his feelings for Camilla are evident. You can see his happiness. In fact, I was listening to old interviews, and I really realised how much happier he is now, and how, it was obviously a failed marriage. They weren't compatible. There was a huge age difference. They had hugely different interests, and that became apparent on the Australian trip.
There were some beautiful moments together on the Australian trip. Her in her beautiful blue ball gown and them dancing. How, I guess, to the public, how much did they want to see that love?
We love a fairy tale, and we wanted to believe in that fairy tale, and at that stage there was no indication that it wasn't anything other than a fairy tale, even if there were difficulties behind the scene. I think that's what we hope for people. We believe that royalty, I mean, obviously the template set by the Queen and Prince Philip, the most solid marriage, and while, the three of the Queen's children would go on to separate and divorce, we wanted to believe in it at that stage. And why not? He is the heir to the throne. She's this very glamorous kindergarten teacher who loves children. You could obviously see her natural mothering instincts. So there were lots of elements in the fairy tale that just resonated with the public. We want to believe. We still want to believe. We want to believe Kate and William. We want to believe William and Meghan. But do we really know what goes on behind the scenes?
And how glamorous was Princess Diana when she came to Australia? Some beautiful outfits. Describe to us how she looked.
Oh, well, the great thing about Diana's style was that it was essentially hers. Those beautiful big white collars on the grass on the lawn when she sat down and William played with the toy. The blue dress where they were dancing together. There's so many of those outfits which in the years since have been referenced by other women in the royal family, just particularly Kate and Meghan. And I think, she showed us for the first time. We'd had the Queen, and the Queen, of course, was a different figure and a shorter woman. But Diana really stepped into her role as a glamazon, as on the world stage. She understood colour. I mean, having met her, she was so tall, so elegant. Those legs went on for days. And so she looked amazing in clothes. And of course, with the jewellery, it was, we were seeing this beautiful young woman. Traditionally, we'd seen older women wearing the jewellery. This was the first time that we'd seen this very, very young, glamorous princess.
What about the Queen in Australia? How important was her visit back in 1954? It was the first by a British monarch to come to Australia. How significant was that moment?
Hugely significant. Of course, she arrived by ship, and her father, King George, was due to come earlier than that, but then of course he died. So the fact that the trip was put off and then she eventually came, she stayed for nearly 2 months, which was an extremely long trip. She left behind Charles and Anne, who were then 5 and 3. She crossed the country on planes, trains, buses, everything on that trip. There was a little bit of a skirmish that while she was in WA, there was an outbreak of poliomyelitis, and the Premier then said, look, you need to stay on the ship and only eat that food during that time. So it wasn't uneventful. But in terms of a monarch, those days, 1954, these were the first, very, very first days of television. The first televised event in Australia was humongous in terms of the public's interest in what was happening, but also the significance in the Commonwealth and the Queen's role as head of the Commonwealth for us.
And not all royals like Australia, Harry and Meghan. Meghan in particular, she spoke about how this tour changed everything. Why?
Well, it changed everything for good and bad. It changed everything, in Harry's words, because the royal family got to see how brilliant Meghan was at the job. But from Meghan's perspective, and we've heard about this, that she was sort of questioned, why are these people coming out? This is just silly. And she just couldn't actually see the role of the monarchy and what it meant. And when it was explained to her that this is the institution, this is how it works, this is how we go and we meet people and we go on walkabouts, but she couldn't quite understand it in a theoretical perspective. But in terms of doing it, remember she baked that the banana bread that she took along to, I can't remember what the event was, but she took along banana bread. She was adored. So it did change, but I think it showcased to her that her acting job, this was not her acting job. This was another role entirely, and she was part of a big institution, and she wasn't the hero of it. She was a cog in the wheel of the institution, and I think that became very clear to her quite quickly. Of course, it was a glorious time for us because we learned that she was pregnant. I met her the night of the National Geographic Awards. She looked incredible. She looked like she was made for the job, but obviously already behind the scenes there were murmurings of discontent.